guys. Um, it's late. Oh, sorry. Let me get rid of my gum so I can talk better. Sorry about that. Nothing like live, huh? So, hey guys, this is Lady Raven, and we are going to be talking today in our live about rites of passage. And then at the end of our lives, I'm going to do the drawing for everybody who signed up for our YouTube channel this week. So, yay, somebody's going to be a lucky winner. So let's talk about rites of passage. So what do we want to cover in that? What is a rite of passage, first of all? A lot of people, we hear this word all the time, but a lot of people are not exactly sure what it means. So a rite of passage is something that marks a transition and a change. So you go from one thing to another. And so there is basically it's an idea of being reborn with new purpose from your old self. So here's a perfect example. When you get married, right? That's a rite of passage. So you get married, what are you moving from? From being single, from living your life by yourself. Then the activity is getting married. And then the new you is the married person, right? So this is kind of a similar thing when you have somebody that is divorcing, right? That's another rite of passage. So you go from being what? A couple, and then the rite happens, and then now you're single again. And so the thing also happens for when you have a baby, right? The baby goes from not being existing, rite of passage, existing. So there's a lot of different things that go on in rites of passage. And in ancient cultures, this is something that was done because it was seen as being a benefit to just about everybody in that culture. So it was a benefit in order for a child, a boy, to become a man in his teenage years, then he had to undergo a rite of passage. And a big part of the rite of passage is the idea of earning it, right? So there's in paganism, we talk about the suffering that goes along with it, right? So let's say if you're going to be initiated into another degree, into another tradition, into another something else, then the idea of the suffering is going to be the growth that happens for you to reach that new level. So you were here, you grew, you learned, you changed, you processed a bunch of difficult things. And then once that happened, at the very end of it, now you are initiated, this brand new person with all this knowledge that you had from before. So the marriage ceremony right now is not necessarily a suffering ceremony because it's bringing two people together, but most of the other rites of passage were like that. So a lot of teenage rites of passage for boys and girls in ancient cultures involved some kind of a test or a suffering of some kind. So they would send a boy into the woods with a weapon and say, you got 5 days. If you come back alive, you're a man, right? So that was the suffering that was happening in order to gain knowledge, to gain and to earn your place in life as this new stage. And it's the idea of exchange. So there was an energy exchange that happened. I gave, I suffered, I did all of these things. And in exchange for this, I come back as a new person with knowledge gained from what happened. And so we don't celebrate rites of passage anymore as a society. We celebrate, marriages. Obviously, people always celebrate a marriage. And we also do celebrate funerals in a way. But all of the other rites of passage that marks different parts in people's lives do not get celebrated. And one of the side effects of that is that they don't get celebrated. They don't get recognized from the community. They don't get recognized from that person. And so that milestone loses some value in between because of that. So let's say, for example, you go and you get, here's a for example, you get married, but you, instead of getting married, having a wedding, you elope, right? You go and you elope and you go to court and you do the thing and you sign your papers and you elope. Your eloping missed out on that rite of passage, which is the rite of passage of the community coming together to recognize you in your new station, in this new place, right? So that is a part that is going to be missing, which means that the community recognition of allowing you to step out as this new person didn't happen. So what happens now is every time you run into somebody, they're going, oh, how you doing? Oh, I got married. You did? What happened? Oh. So you have to do this rite of passage one-on-one with every single person you encounter because you didn't do that as a community whole. So a rite of passage is not just for you as the person, but it also is for the community, for them to be able to recognize you and for them to be able to support you in whatever it is that you're doing. So some of the more common rites of passage that we have in paganism, at least, we have a awakening that happens when a child is born. And the awakening is kind of a blessing of that child, of telling that child symbolically that the community is there to help them, that the community is there to bless them and to support them and to help them move them forward. It is also a symbolism to the mother, because it's a rite of passage that's happening for two people, the child that was born and the mother for becoming a parent. And so the community steps up and says, hey, this is going to be something difficult, and we're here to help you. And some people may say, well, what's the pain that involved in that? The childbirth. That is the pain. That is the trauma that you underwent in order to earn your new place in this in this new phase that you're in now, being a mother and a child being born. Very traumatic process of being born, and the process of dying is very traumatic, because the spirit has to be either coming from the spirit world and entering into a physical body here and coming into this world. That is a traumatic process. And then the same thing when we die, we're letting go of this physical body to return and go back to the spirit world. That is also a traumatic process. So when we're looking at rites of passage, there's always going to be some kind of a trauma in between, to be able to move into that. Even though for marriage ceremonies there is not necessarily a trauma, I would argue, and some people would, that planning a wedding is trauma enough. But that's not here nor there. But so anyway, so that's the first rite of passage that we celebrate in paganism, is the awakening, which is the child is born, the child's presented to the community, the child is welcomed, blessings are offered. Everybody says, hey, I'm going to be here for you. We're going to be here to take care of you. So that's the first rite of passage. And then if you keep moving on in pagan community, we have the rite of passage that the child goes into adulthood. And so that is a rite of passage that we don't necessarily celebrate in this way anymore. We do celebrate it in the forms of graduation. And a lot of people will say, well, how did you suffer? High school is 4 years of suffering, or college, 4 years of suffering, of having to study, of dealing with social anxiety, of dealing with all of those things. And then you come out at the other side as a different and new person. So that is kind of the suffering that takes place for that. But this is kind of how we do a rite of passage now, which is sort of equivalent to how ancient cultures would do it for teenage kids, although we do it much later, which the part of that process, what it does is it delays development until much later. So I think it would be safe to say that children, young adults, would mature much faster in ancient cultures because of the trials they were put through that would bring about maturity, because that is another portion of that. That is another component of the rite of passage. The trauma is what's going to kind of wake you up to the responsibilities that are going to come your way when you step into this new path. So the trauma is part of the learning, and it brings a maturity of some kind. So this is our rite of passage for teenagers moving into adulthood now. Is generally a graduation from high school, graduation from college. Maybe it's a little bit later. I would venture to say the high school graduation is probably the biggest rite of passage the young kids are going to experience. In some cultures, you still have like the debutantes and the quinceañeras, which is for different cultures celebrating coming of age for young women, and for young men. There's a lot of other coming of ages that happen. But this is basically in olden times, they would say, okay, the man is now 12 or 13, and part of his rite of passage would be to go and to sit with other men and understand what it means to be a man, understand what their responsibilities are. And the same thing with women. Women would go and they would be taken into the circle of women, and they would speak to the other women, and they would learn, okay, this is what's going to happen to you. This is where they would learn about childbirth, about sex, about all these different things that would happen to them as they're entering into this new journey. And then so that is what happens in the middle years. So, and then we move to weddings, right? Weddings is a rite of passage also of connecting two lives to become one life. And so the ceremony itself, on an energetic level, what that ceremony does is it brings an energetic cord that connects two people together. In ancient paganism, we would actually have a wedding cord, which is what, because I got married in a hand fasting. So that is how my marriage ceremony went, which is a cord that gets then looped and tied around the hands of the bride and the groom. And this is what in a lot of times the expression tying the knot, that is where that expression came from, because you would loop the cord in a special way and then you would tie the knot, and then the hands are pulled out and you have that cord that's knotted, and that knot is a representation of the two lives that are coming together. So that would be what you would do in a hand fasting. This is why people spend a lot of time creating their marriage cords. I did. I mean, I braided it, I pulled different types of material into it, I added things to it that represented me and that represented my husband, so that we could kind of bring that together. I tried to loop him into helping me out with it. He didn't want to. So I just kind of showed him, this is going to represent you. Are you okay with that? And then he'd be like, yeah, okay, I'm okay with it. So that's kind of how that ended up going. But that is what that celebration means. When you go into the community now, you're saying to the community, hey, everybody, I am now a married woman, which says I'm no longer on the market, which says I now have another person that's part of my life that holds equal standing in my life with me. So it's not just about me, what's best for me. It's about us and what's best for us. And it lets the community know that it's not okay to not take that person into consideration. So there's a lot of things that a marriage ceremony can do for you. The one ceremony that's really left out in today's society is a hand parting ceremony. So everybody gets together, you get married, you got this big wedding, this big ceremony that says, look up world, I'm together, we're a couple now. And then when you get married, when you get a divorce, generally it's just kind of like go to the courts, sign a piece of paper, fight over it a little bit, and boom, voila, you're divorced. And so in paganism, there is also a ceremony called a hand parting, which is an important ceremony for when you are walking away from a marriage. The same way that those two people were bound together by an energetic cord when that marriage was established. When you divorce somebody, it's important to have those same two people being separated by an energetic cord, and say separating that energetic cord so that they can now step forward into their new lives as single people again, for the community to recognize, hey, these people are no longer together. These people are no longer one person. Now they are two separate people, and we are going to give each one of them their reverence, their individuality, instead of looking at them as a couple. So the society, the community recognizes that part of that. And I think that this is why there's a lot of, in today's world, a lot of my clients that come to see me have issues with energetic cords tied to their exes. And the reason for that is because that ceremony never happened. And because the ceremony never happened, the cord was never removed. So a cord that sits there and it just is no longer wanted by either party, but it's not actually removed, it can cause all kinds of problems between those two people that can even manifest in physical ailments later on in life. That's one of the first things that when I do a cord removal for somebody that we're going to look at. Let's see what cords you have that are no longer connected, that no longer need to be connected, that are maybe not adding anything positive to your energy system. But that cord automatically gets removed when you are doing a hand parting ceremony. And I know it's really difficult, because if you divorce somebody, chances are it wasn't amicable, and you're like, I never want to see that person ever again. And so you're not going to want to step into ceremony with them. But it's a crucial part of that process, is to be able to do that. And even if your partner doesn't want to do it, there is a way that you can do that ceremony for yourself, a hand parting for yourself, that will release that cord, at least on your end, so that you won't have to carry the burden of that. And it also tells, it can say to people, hey, I'm free now. I'm able to move forward in this new way now that I'm back to being single. Whether you choose to do it just for yourself, or whether you choose to do it with your friends and family and community, either way, you can receive support for doing that and for marking a new chapter of your life. And then after that, we have a croning or a saging. So for women, it's called the croning, and for men, it's called a saging. And that is basically a ceremony that is going to happen when you are moving from your adult years into your wise years. In shamanism, they say your grandmother's years. In paganism, we talk about your elder years, right? Your crone years, where you have learned all the things and you have all of this wisdom about you. For women, typically there is a physical component that happens, which is menopause. So when menopause hits, after you clear menopause, generally at that time, you would be ready for your Croning. Some would argue that menopause is the suffering that you go through in order to earn your Croning. But anyway, so that's what's going to happen when you go into that, and that is a way for the community to represent, celebrate that person's life, and say, we recognize and we're grateful for all the contributions that you've made to our society, everything that you did for the community. And now we elevate you to the position of elder, because even though physically you may not be able to help anymore, we can still come to you for wisdom. You have what we don't have. We have the physical bodies to do the work. You have the wisdom that can show us how to do this work better. And so this is a transition that happens. And the same thing happens for men. Obviously, men doesn't necessarily market with a physical component, but the same thing is going to happen for them in the same way, which is saying it's a gratitude, it's a celebration of their life, saying, this is all that you've done for us, for the community. And now it's time to recognize you as your own person. It's time to celebrate you and the wisdom that you've gained that you now can give back to the community. So that's an important part of kind of entering into your grandfather and grandmother years, into your eldership years. And finally, the last rite of passage that everybody has is going to be when you pass away, the rite of passage of death, which is the dying process is the pain that you're going through. That is the trauma. That is the suffering that goes through into that process. And at the end of that, you move into a new state of existence. And it's important for the community to be there and to be present, because they can, number one, aid you and support you in that time, because it is a very difficult process. And number two, it is good for the community to be able to come together and celebrate your life and your contributions, and find a way that the community as a whole can add you into the ancestor memory. That we can say, okay, you have been, your life has ended, you've been celebrated, and now you are an ancestor, and we recognize you for that. And this is a nice way to do a send-off for a soul that's gone through their transition. And this is something that we don't really do as much anymore as a community. And I mean, we may have funerals, but funerals a lot of times ends up being a lot about the family that was left behind, which is, that's important, obviously, but it really needs to be a celebration and a welcoming of that soul into the body of ancestors that we have. And in modern culture, we are so terrified of death. We are so afraid of death. We do everything that we possibly can, even degrading things to the body, to be able to avoid death. That for us, it makes death an even more traumatic process, when death is really a natural process of life. And so this is one of the things that makes it difficult for then that soul. This is why we have a lot more suffering involved in death, and a lot more disorientation involved for the soul once it's actually moved on and passed through. Why? Because its life wasn't celebrated, because their life wasn't the part that was responsible. At the end, everything is reduced to pain management, to extending life, to doing all of these different things. And it's not preparing them for entering into the other world and for entering into a position of ancestorship. And so that soul, when it transitions over, it's in a very deep state of trauma. And it takes a long time, longer than it used to, for that soul to transition out of that and to step into a place of being an ancestor. And sometimes they need help with that, just because of the intense trauma that was caused at the end of that process. So rites of passage are something that, it makes people nervous. Some of them, obviously, births are always celebrated, but death is always dreaded and regretted. And it's sad, because it is a process that every single one of us will have to go through. Nobody can choose. You can choose not to get married. You can't choose not to die. That's going to happen. We are all going to go through this process. And instead of understanding that and celebrating a life, and then preparing ourselves to move into the world of ancestors, to move into the world, to the spirit realm, where we can then continue our journey, we have managed to wrap up all of this fear, this anxiety, this extra pain, all of these things that are wrapped up into these life extending processes and procedures that kind of we use. And that is really done to the detriment of all of our ancestral lines and the earth as an ancestor as a whole. So that's something that we, definitely should be looking into, maybe improving a little bit, but people are not going to. There's fear. I remember when my stepdad passed away, he was so terrified that he even called me up and said, is there a deal I can make so I can stay longer? And I said, no, honey, there's no deal. There's nothing I can do for you in that regard. But to me, that spoke volumes of the amount of fear and terror that is put upon people for going through this process. It's unknown, and we have branded it evil. It's evil as far as people are concerned, and it really isn't. It's a natural part of life. It's going to happen to all of us. And so in order to have the best transition possible, we need to be able to live life the fullest, so that we can, when we come to that place where like we came here, we did what we were supposed to, and now my time here is done, and I move on to the next stage of my existence with a clear conscience and open arms to move to where I need to go next. And because of the fear, we're not able to do that anymore, and that's a little bit sad. So anyway, so that is rites of passage. This is how we go through. We kind of went through a whirlwind with all of them. If I do rites of passage for people, I will do Croning ceremonies. I've done many wickenings, done a lot of marriages. I have done hand partings for one person, not for the two people, because a lot of times you can't get the partner who's not on board with it to come in for that ceremony. So we can do a single individual hand parting ceremony. But anyway, think about that in your life. Think about if you have a child, if you have a teenager, what can you do to celebrate that rite of passage? What can you do that's going to do something for them, that's going to say, hey, you're moving into these years now. Let's celebrate it. Let's have the community come in here and celebrate you and offer you support and show you how welcomed you are going to be into this new phase of life. And we really don't do that anymore. And we wonder why our children don't mature as quickly as they used to. So I really think that a lot of these practices are something that we probably should incorporate back into our lives. Anyway, if you have any questions, just message me. I know people are not messaging me questions here. They didn't used to use it on Instagram either. But if you have any questions, feel free to message me. You can message me on the Wild Community, WYLDcommunity.com. Once I post this video, you can private message me. You can post a question. You can even post a question in the comments here if you want to. So that is Rites of Passage. Oh, and before I forget, so tomorrow, we are going to be doing our live sale on Raven Moon Emporium Instagram, and we are going to have tools in there for all different types of rites of passage. So I'm going to try to include a little bit for wickening, for graduation, for hand fasting, hand parting, for croning. So different little tools that you can see, and how can these things help me to move into that place in my life. So that's coming tomorrow. But now, before I forget, we have our little raffle to see who is going to be winning our raffle that we did for this. Basically, the way this is going to work is it's going to be for $100 worth of product that is customized for you. And so what that means is, and it may be more than $100 because I tend to get a little crazy sometimes. So basically what that's going to be for you is, whoever the winner is, I'm going to contact you and I'm going to ask you, what are the things that you're currently working on? And then you're going to tell me, here's what I want to get into. And then I will put together a little kit for you, chosen by me, that's going to include all the items that I believe would be helpful for you, given the place that you're in life right now and where you're going. So fingers crossed. All right, let's see. And I went in and I pulled all of the subscribers, the new subscribers we had yesterday. But I will say this, if you have your YouTube account, I just found this out yesterday when I looked. If you have your YouTube account set to private on everything, I'm not going to get a notification that you followed me. So there is no way for me to know that you followed me if you have the lockdown on your account where nobody can see what you're doing. So the raffle is going to be included based just the people that I could actually see that joined. I went through all my notifications. I went through all the subscriber lists. And in the subscriber list, it only allows me to see the subscribers that actually don't have their accounts on lockdown. So here we go. Moving them. And let's see. So we have, our winner is ANGHOWI. I think this is somebody that subscribed last week. Let me see if I can show you. That is the name. ANGHOWI. I'm going to reach out to you. I'm going to see if I can reach out to you. If I can find information about your account on where to reach you, I'm going to reach out to you there. But if not, I am going to post this also on Instagram to let you know for you to contact me so we can get the party started for you. And also, if you can give me your consent, I would like to put your name on our next newsletter saying that you were our winner. So this is our winner. And like I said, I'm going to reach out to you, and hopefully we will start putting something together for you that's going to be really special for you to further your spiritual path. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for joining me today. I so appreciate it. I will see you guys next week. Take care. Bye-bye.